Margaery Tyrell meets a tragic end in HBO's Game of Thrones, but her death fits her character's story incredibly well. Margaery maneuvers her way to becoming Queen of the Seven Kingdoms early in Game of Thrones' 8-season run. However, she perishes when Cersei Lannister blows up the Great September of Baelor at the end of Season 6. It's an abrupt and violent fate for Margaery, her brother, and her father, but it's one that makes sense in the context of her character arc. Margaery is one of the few Game of Thrones characters who is almost never difficult to like, so her death hits hard when it happens. When it first aired, it left many feeling like she deserved better. Even Natalie Dormer, who brought the character to life, initially felt frustrated by Margaery's fate. She told Collider Ladies' Night as much, adding that some of Margaery's discontent bled into her own feelings. But Dormer notes that her character is vindicated by her final moments. And really, her last Game of Thrones scene perfectly sums up her character. Margaery Tyrell's tragic Game of Thrones fate fit her character really well. She was bound to make a misstep playing the titular game. Joffrey, Jack Gleeson, and Margaery, Natalie Dormer, in the Great September in Game of Thrones Season 3, Episode 4. Margaery spends the entirety of her story playing the Game of Thrones, so it's no surprise she begins making missteps during the show's later seasons. Dormer's character is incredibly skilled at manipulating those around her, even managing to bring out a kinder side of Joffrey Baratheon during her engagement to him. However, Margaery never manages to win Cersei over, and this comes back to haunt her later on. Cersei uses the High Sparrow to bring down Loras and Margaery Tyrell, and it puts the latter in a sticky situation that eventually leads to her death. Given how many people Margaery must maneuver, especially after she becomes queen, she's bound to lose political battles. Unfortunately, Margaery underestimates the wrong people. Both the High Sparrow and Cersei aren't playing by ordinary rules, and Margaery's downfall begins when she gets wrapped up with both of them. Just as she convinces the High Sparrow that she's happy to atone for her sins, Cersei discovers a way to rid herself of both of them. A loss is bound to happen, even to someone as clever as Margaery, but it's unfortunate that it's to a woman who doesn't hold back. How Game of Thrones' final Margaery scene sums up her entire story. The Great September of Baelor scene showcases her strengths and weaknesses. Natalie Dormer as Margaery Tyrell looking over her shoulder with a shocked expression in Game of Thrones. Margaery's final Game of Thrones moment perfectly sums up her character arc, showcasing the strengths and weaknesses that lead her to this point. Dormer is right that her character is vindicated when the Great September of Baelor explodes, as she catches on to Cersei's scheming before anyone else. Even when she's on the losing end of a confrontation, Margaery is incredibly observant and capable of reading the people around her. She knows immediately why Cersei isn't present at her own trial, and she quickly tries to adapt. It's a shame no one is willing to listen to her. Of course, Margaery doesn't anticipate foul play from Cersei before entering the September of Baelor, which also highlights her main weakness. The Tyrells are politically savvy throughout Game of Thrones, but they make a show of playing by the rules. Margaery uses marriage agreements and charm to work her way to the top, and her family utilizes their money and status. Only Olenna is shown playing dirty, and she covers her tracks nicely. It seems Margaery doesn't anticipate more outwardly hostile behavior from her opponents, and that winds up being her downfall. The Tyrells needed to die before the HBO series' final season. Margaery had to die when she did. Margaery Tyrell's death marked a proper end to her story, and it needed to happen before Game of Thrones' last 2 seasons. Viewers might have been sad to see Dormer's character go, but there was no place for her in Game of Thrones' final conflicts. Had Margaery and Tommen survived to see Season 8, the fight against the White Walkers would have unfolded very differently. They were less likely to betray the North, which meant they needed to be out of Cersei's way by the time Jon Snow and his allies came knocking.